I knew something was off the moment I walked into the living room that Friday night. It wasn't the silence. Sarah was often home alone on Fridays. I'd been at work late, trying to catch up on some deadline, so the house was usually quiet by the time I got back. What threw me was the light. Or rather, the lack of it. Sarah always left a lamp on in the corner, claiming it made the room feel cozier, even when she wasn't in it. But this time, the living room was pitch dark. Not even the flicker of the TV, which she liked to keep on for background noise. That's what got me this heavy, unnatural silence. A silence that felt like something was hiding in it. I flicked on the light, and that's when I saw it: 2 half-full wine glasses on the coffee table, lipstick smudged on one, the other rim pristine. My heart dropped into my stomach. I scanned the room quickly. Sarah wasn't there. The couch cushions were slightly disheveled, like someone had gotten up in a hurry. My mind raced. I heard a creak upstairs. My gut twisted, and without even thinking, I was on the staircase, taking 2 steps at a time. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Light spilled out into the hallway, casting eerie shadows. I pushed it open, and there she was. Sarah. Standing by the bed, her back turned to me. She was buttoning her blouse, her movements hurried, like she was caught in the middle of something. My heart pounded in my chest. I hadn't seen the whole picture yet, but my body already knew what my mind was trying to reject. Sarah? My voice cracked as I said her name. She froze, her hands still fumbling with the last button. She didn't turn around. Didn't say a word. Just stood there like a guilty statue. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable rustle of fabric behind me. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, already knowing what I was going to see, but still hoping and praying that I was wrong. There was a man, half-dressed, trying to yank his shirt over his head, scrambling to his feet on the other side of the bed. Some idiot I'd never seen before. He looked at me, wide-eyed, like a deer caught in headlights, and then bolted for the bathroom, slamming the door behind him. Sarah finally turned around, her face pale, her eyes wide with panic. She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. And for a second, we just stood there, staring at each other, the tension so thick it was suffocating. I should have been angry, I should have been screaming, demanding answers. But instead, I just stood there, numb, trying to process the fact that the woman I'd built a life with had just been in bed with someone else, while I was downstairs. I stood there, frozen, my body refusing to react. The guy was still hiding in the bathroom, and Sarah was in front of me, buttoning her blouse like she had any chance of putting the pieces back together. My head buzzed with 1,000 thoughts, but none of them made sense. I wasn't even sure what I was feeling in that moment: rage, disbelief, maybe even a sick kind of curiosity about how far this had gone, and for how long. "Who the hell is in there?" I asked, my voice more calm than I expected. Sarah winced but stayed quiet. Her eyes were darting from me to the closed bathroom door, probably wondering if she could somehow talk her way out of this. But it was too late. Way too late. "Who is he?" I asked again, louder this time, pointing at the door. I took a step forward, and Sarah instinctively took a step back. She looked terrified, but not of me, more like the whole situation had spiraled out of her control, and she had no clue how to fix it. "Ryan, please," she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think." I stared at her, incredulous. "Not what I think?" I repeated, letting out a short, bitter laugh. "Sarah, I just walked into our bedroom and found you half naked with some guy hiding in the bathroom. What exactly am I supposed to think?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out at first. She was scrambling, trying to figure out how to salvage this. But it didn't matter. There was no explanation that could erase what I had just seen. The bathroom door creaked open, and the guy poked his head out like some coward, clearly hoping I wasn't going to beat the crap out of him. He was younger than me, maybe mid-20s, skinny with shaggy hair, and wearing the kind of smug expression you'd expect from someone who thought he was untouchable. That was until I took a step toward him. Then his face turned white. "Get the hell out," I snapped, pointing toward the door. He didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his shoes from the floor and bolted down the hallway, not even bothering to look back. I heard the front door slam a moment later, and then it was just me and Sarah. We stood there in silence for what felt like hours, though it was probably only a few seconds. I could see her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. She looked like a cornered animal, desperate to escape the inevitable confrontation. "How long?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. Sarah blinked, confused. "How long what? How long has this been going on?" I clarified, keeping my voice steady. "How long have you been screwing around behind my back?" She flinched at the harshness of my words, but she didn't deny it. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't some moment of weakness. This was something more. "Ryan," she started, but then stopped, her eyes searching mine for some hint of understanding, maybe even forgiveness. She wasn't going to get it. "You what?" I pressed, feeling my anger building now. "You what, Sarah? You didn't mean for this to happen? It was a mistake? You love me and didn't want to hurt me?" I was practically spitting the words at her. She bit her lip and looked away, her eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she whispered. That was it. That was all she had to say. "Are you serious right now?" I took a step toward her, and she flinched. "You didn't mean for me to find out like this? That's your excuse? Not that you're sorry for what you did, not that you made a mistake, but that you didn't mean to get caught?" "Ryan, please," she tried again, but I cut her off. "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to Ryan, please me. You don't get to beg for sympathy or forgiveness or whatever the hell you're hoping for right now. You've been lying to me. For how long, Sarah? A few months? A year?" She shook her head, her hands trembling. "It's not like that," she muttered. "What's it like, then? Explain it to me. Make me understand how you ended up in our bed with some stranger." She finally looked at me, and I could see her breaking down. The tears were spilling over now, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to be manipulated by some half-assed sob story. I wanted the truth. I deserved the truth. "It's been a few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far." A few months. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. So, while I was working late, while I was trusting her, she'd been sneaking around, screwing some random guy in our home. In our bed. Why? I asked, and my voice cracked. I hated that it did, but I needed to know. Why him? Why now? What the hell happened to us? Sarah wiped her eyes, sniffling like she was the victim here. "I don't know," she said. "I didn't plan for this to happen, Ryan. It just did. Things between us haven't been the same for a while." I stared at her, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. "So, what, you decided to just throw everything away?" 9 years, Sarah. 9 years of marriage, and this is how it ends? With you sneaking around behind my back because things haven't been the same? "I didn't throw it away," she insisted. "I didn't want to lose you, Ryan. Don't you dare," I snapped, cutting her off again. "Don't you dare stand there and say you didn't want to lose me when you were screwing another guy in our house. You've already lost me, Sarah. The second you let that guy into our bed, you lost me." She was full on crying now, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. But I wasn't going to feel sorry for her. I couldn't. All I felt was this deep, gnawing pain in my chest. A pain that wouldn't go away, no matter how much I wanted it to. "You want to know the worst part?" I said, my voice quieter now, the anger draining out of me and leaving behind something else. Something hollow. "The worst part is that I didn't see it coming. I trusted you. I believed in us, and you took that and you ripped it apart. For what? For some fling? Was it worth it?" Sarah shook her head, her voice cracking. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. It wasn't just about him. It was about us. Us? I repeated, feeling sick. There is no us anymore, Sarah. Not after this. She didn't respond. She couldn't. There was nothing left to say. We both knew it. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart pounding in my ears. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. I just needed to get out of that house, away from her, away from everything. As I reached the front door, I paused, glancing back at the house we built together, the life we shared. And I wondered how it all fell apart so quickly. I left the room because if I stayed, I wasn't sure what would happen. The front door was open, the cold night air hitting my face, but I didn't step out. I stood there for a moment, trying to breathe. Trying to not let the rage win. My hands were shaking, clenched into fists at my sides. I could still hear her crying upstairs. Her sobs made me sick. I should have walked away, just left the house, but something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the image of her with that guy in our bed, or maybe it was the fact that for months, I'd been living a lie. Whatever it was, it pulled me back inside, up the stairs, and straight into the bedroom where Sarah was still standing, her face buried in her hands. "Stop crying," I said coldly as I slammed the bedroom door behind me. She jumped at the sound, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "You don't get to cry, Sarah. You don't get to act like you're the victim here." She tried to speak, but I didn't let her. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses or any half-hearted apologies. I was done playing nice. I was done being the guy who sat back and took everything quietly. "What the hell were you thinking?" I shouted. Was he worth it? Was that loser in the bathroom worth burning our marriage to the ground? She flinched at the volume of my voice, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. "I wasn't thinking," she mumbled, her voice trembling. "It just happened, Ryan. I didn't mean for it to go this far." "How far, Sarah?" I snapped. "How far did you let it go? Was this the first time? Or were you screwing him every time I left the house?" Her silence was enough. I could see it on her face, in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes. This wasn't the first time. It had been going on for months, maybe longer. And I had been clueless, trusting her completely while she was off with that guy. "Answer me," I barked, taking a step toward her. She stumbled back, hitting the edge of the bed, her eyes wide with fear. "It wasn't like that," she cried, her voice shaking. "It wasn't about him. It was never about him, Ryan. It was about us." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Us? There's no us, Sarah. Not anymore." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to regain some composure, but she was failing miserably. "Please, just let me explain," she begged. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I hurt me?" I interrupted, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Sarah, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything we had. You destroyed us." She was shaking her head, like if she just denied it enough times, it would make it less true. "No, Ryan, that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to ruin anything. I didn't want to lose you." I stared at her, my mind racing. I couldn't believe the audacity of what she was saying. She didn't want to lose me? She didn't want to ruin anything? Was she serious? Then why? I asked, my voice quieter now, but still seething with anger. "Why did you do it? If you didn't want to ruin us, then why?" She looked at me, tears filling her eyes again, and for a second, I thought she might actually be honest with me. But then she looked away, biting her lip. She was searching for the right words, trying to figure out how to spin this in a way that would make me forgive her. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I felt like we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Drifting apart? Was that what she thought? Because I hadn't seen it. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I never thought we were falling apart. And even if we were, how did screwing some random guy solve that problem? So, instead of talking to me, you just decided to screw someone else? I asked, my voice harsh. That's how you fix things now? It wasn't about sex, she said, her voice breaking. It wasn't just about that. Then what the hell was it about? I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like it was about sex. She shook her head, her tears falling again. No, it was more than that. I felt like I wasn't important to you anymore. Like I was just here, going through the motions, and you didn't even notice me. I stood there, stunned. I didn't even notice her? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had worked my ass off to give us a good life, to make sure we had everything we needed. I trusted her completely, and this was what she had felt? So, what? I asked, my voice flat. You felt neglected, so you found someone else to give you attention? Is that it? It wasn't like that, she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to fix things with us. And then he was there, and it just happened. It didn't just happen, Sarah, I spat. You let it happen. You made a choice. She flinched, her face crumpling as she started to sob again. I know, she cried. I know I screwed up. I know I messed everything up. But I never wanted to lose you, Ryan. I love you. Love me? I echoed, my voice filled with disbelief. Is that supposed to make me feel better? That you love me, even though you've been screwing someone else behind my back? She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just stood there, crying, as I stared at her, my anger simmering just below the surface. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. But instead, I just stood there, watching her cry, feeling empty inside. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry, Ryan. Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can. Counseling? I interrupted, laughing bitterly. You think some therapist is going to fix this? You think talking about our feelings is going to make me forget what you did? She wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. I don't know, she admitted. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to throw everything away. Everything's already gone, Sarah, I said coldly. You threw it away the second you let that guy into our bed. She shook her head, her tears falling again. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. Don't give up on us. I stared at her, feeling a deep, bitter anger welling up inside me. You don't get to ask me that, I said quietly. You don't get to beg for another chance after everything you've done. She didn't say anything, her sobs filling the room as I stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I couldn't stand to look at her, to hear her pathetic excuses and apologies. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, ignoring her desperate cries for me to stop, to come back. I made my way downstairs, my mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. I wanted to punch something, to scream, to do anything that would make this pain go away. I found myself in the kitchen, staring blankly at the counter. There was a knife lying there, sharp and gleaming under the dim light. For a brief second, I considered what it would feel like to destroy something. To shatter everything the way she had shattered me. But I shook the thought away. That wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I grabbed my phone and dialed the one person I knew I could count on. Tom, my best friend since high school. He picked up after the first ring. Hey man, what's up, he said, his voice light, unaware of the storm raging inside me. I need a place to crash, I said, my voice flat. Tonight. There was a pause on the other end. What happened, he asked, his voice serious now. Sarah, I said, the word heavy on my tongue. She's been cheating on me. There was silence for a moment, then a low whistle. Shit, Tom said. Okay, yeah, come over. I'll be here. Thanks, I muttered before hanging up. I grabbed my jacket, my wallet, and my keys, then walked out of the house without looking back. Sarah didn't try to stop me this time. I spent that first night at Tom's place, sitting in silence with a bottle of whiskey in my hand, staring at the TV without even registering what was on. Tom didn't ask too many questions, he knew me well enough to know I wasn't ready to talk yet. He offered to call in sick for me at work, but I told him I'd handle it. I needed time to think, to process what had just happened. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah standing there, fumbling with her blouse, that pathetic excuse of a man hiding in the bathroom. And then, her face when she admitted it had been going on for months. All those nights I trusted her, thinking she was at some late client meeting or out with friends. It had all been a lie. By morning, I had one thing crystal clear in my mind: I wasn't going to just let this slide. Sarah didn't get to tear my life apart and walk away without consequences. I wasn't interested in crying about it or wallowing in self-pity. I wanted payback. The idea started forming in my head as the sun rose that morning. I wasn't going to be reckless about it. I wasn't going to yell, scream, or hit anyone. That would be too easy, and honestly, it wouldn't feel like enough. No, I was going to hit her where it hurt. I was going to take away everything she cared about. She made her choice, and now she was going to live with it. I started small. I wasn't ready to go back home yet, but I had my plan in motion before I even left Tom's house. First, I called our bank and opened a new account, under my name only. Then I moved all of our savings, every single cent, into that account. I left just enough in the joint one to cover the upcoming bills so it wouldn't raise suspicion right away. But everything else? Mine. Next, I started looking into divorce lawyers. I wasn't going to waste any time. I needed the best, the most ruthless lawyer I could find, and after a couple of calls, I found exactly who I was looking for: Mark Turner. He had a reputation for tearing people apart in court and leaving them with nothing. That was what I wanted. I scheduled a meeting for the next day. I left Tom's place around noon, feeling more focused than I had in days. On the drive back to the house, I thought about the rest of my plan. There were still a few loose ends I needed to tie up before I could confront Sarah again. I wasn't going to do it until I had everything in place. This had to be airtight. When I pulled into the driveway, Sarah's car was parked out front. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, walking toward the front door like it was any other day. As soon as I walked in, I could hear her in the kitchen, moving around, probably trying to act like things were normal. I didn't go to her. I didn't want to see her yet. I went straight upstairs to the office and turned on my computer. I had to dig for it a little, but eventually, I found what I was looking for: the login information for her email. We'd shared it for years, and while she'd gotten more secretive with her phone recently, she hadn't bothered changing the password for her work email. Big mistake. I logged in and started scrolling through her sent messages, looking for anything related to the guy she'd been seeing. It didn't take long to find the thread. His name was Andrew, and judging by the emails, he wasn't just some random fling. He was one of her co-workers, a junior realtor who she was mentoring. I smirked at that. I bet she was mentoring him, all right. There were dozens of emails. Some were professional, but most weren't. They were filled with flirtatious comments, suggestive jokes, and plenty of plans to meet up. They even had a code for when they'd meet. It made me sick to my stomach to read, but it was exactly what I needed. I downloaded everything. Screenshots, entire email threads, and even a few attachments. I didn't know what I was going to do with it all yet, but having that evidence in my back pocket made me feel like I had the upper hand. Once I had everything saved, I closed the laptop and headed downstairs. Sarah was in the kitchen, making coffee. When she saw me, her face lit up with hope. For a second, it almost made me laugh, like she thought things could just go back to normal now that I'd cooled off for a night. "Hey," she said softly, putting down the coffee pot. "You came back." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, staring at her, wondering how someone who had shared my life for nearly a decade could have turned into such a stranger. "Yeah," I finally said, my voice cold. "I came back." She took a hesitant step toward me, her hands wringing together nervously. "Ryan, I'm so sorry. I know I messed up, but I've been thinking, and I know we can fix this. We can work through it." I held up my hand, cutting her off. "Stop." She froze, her face falling. She knew then. This wasn't going to be a conversation where I forgave her and we hugged it out. This was the beginning of the end. "I'm not here to fix anything, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I'm here to tell you how this is going to go." Her mouth opened, then closed again as she processed my words. I could see the panic rising in her eyes. "Ryan, please, just let me." "You don't get to talk right now," I interrupted, stepping forward. "You had months to talk. Months where you could have come to me and said something was wrong. But instead, you decided to screw Andrew behind my back. So now, you're going to listen." She paled at the mention of his name. "Shut up, Sarah." My voice was ice cold. "Here's how this is going to work. I've already moved the money into an account in my name. You'll get your share when we finalize the divorce, but until then, don't expect a penny. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon." Her eyes went wide. "Divorce," she whispered. "Ryan, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." I cut her off again. "You think we can just go back to how things were? After what you did? You think I'm just going to pretend like you didn't destroy everything?" Her lip trembled, and I could see the tears welling up in her eyes, but I wasn't going to let that get to me. Not this time. She didn't get to play the victim here. Not after what she'd done. "You made your choice, Sarah," I said, my voice hard. "You chose him. Now, you're going to live with the consequences." She started to cry, tears streaming down her face, but I felt nothing. I had spent the last 24 hours feeling every possible emotion: anger, sadness, confusion, but now I just felt numb. "Please, Ryan," she sobbed. "I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, we can." "I don't want to fix this," I said bluntly. "I'm done. We're done." She crumpled, collapsing onto the floor in a heap, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her for a moment, then turned and walked away. There was nothing left to say. I'd made my decision, and now I was going to follow through with it. Before I left the house, I grabbed my phone and sent an email to Andrew's boss. Attached to it were all the emails between him and Sarah, along with a polite note asking whether this was the type of behavior they allowed in their company. As I hit send, a cold sense of satisfaction washed over me. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to burn it all down. And Sarah was going to watch it burn. 2 days passed after I sent that email. I hadn't seen Sarah since. I wasn't sure if she'd gone back to her parents' house or to some friends, but her absence gave me the space I needed. I wasn't ready to face her again yet, not after everything I'd set in motion. I'd been living in a kind of haze, numb to everything except the occasional wave of anger that kept me going. Tom had been checking in on me, making sure I was eating, but aside from that, I kept to myself. The divorce papers were ready, thanks to my lawyer. Turner didn't waste any time. He laid out every possible advantage I could take in the divorce. He had a detailed plan to minimize Sarah's claim on my assets, and given the evidence I had, he assured me things would go my way in court. He told me I was entitled to the house given that she had been unfaithful and that we could press for her to receive as little as possible. That was what I wanted. To take away everything from her the way she took away everything from me. I was ready for the legal side of things, but there was still one thing I needed to do before I could fully move on. I had to have one last conversation with her. Not just to go over the practicalities of splitting our lives apart, but to say the things that had been boiling inside me since I first caught her in our bedroom with that guy. I knew she was going to come back eventually, so I waited. Every hour that passed felt like a countdown to something inevitable. I played out the conversation in my head over and over, preparing for every excuse, every tear, every pathetic apology she might throw at me. I wasn't going to let her off the hook. Not this time. It was late in the afternoon when I finally heard the front door open. I was sitting in the living room, a drink in my hand, waiting. The house had never felt so quiet. I didn't turn to look when I heard her walk in. I just waited for her to come to me. Sarah's footsteps were soft, hesitant, like she knew what was coming. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and I could feel her eyes on me. She didn't say anything right away. I imagined her trying to gauge my mood, trying to figure out if I was still the man she could manipulate, the man who had trusted her for years without question. I wasn't that man anymore. Ryan? Her voice was soft, almost afraid. I didn't respond. I just took another sip of my drink and stared ahead at the wall, waiting for her to speak again. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know that doesn't mean anything right now, but I don't know what else to say. I set the glass down on the coffee table and finally turned to face her. She looked like hell, her eyes red from crying, her face pale and drawn. Her hair was a mess, like she hadn't bothered to take care of herself for days. Maybe she hadn't. It didn't matter to me. Sit down, I said, my voice flat. She hesitated, then walked over to the chair across from me and sat down, her hands trembling in her lap. She kept glancing at me, her lips trembling like she was about to start crying again. Where have you been? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. At my parents', she replied quietly. I didn't know if you wanted me here, after everything. You knew I didn't, I said coldly. She flinched but didn't argue. I wasn't interested in dancing around the topic anymore. I was ready to lay everything out, and she was going to hear it whether she wanted to or not. I've got the divorce papers, I said, watching her face for a reaction. Turner, my lawyer, is handling everything. You'll be hearing from him soon. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she was going to argue. But then she just nodded, her shoulders slumping. I figured you'd file, she whispered. I didn't think you'd forgive me. Forgive you? I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. You think I was even considering that? I don't know, she said quickly. Ryan, I know what I did was unforgivable. I know I betrayed you. But I never stopped loving you. I never wanted it to end like this. Love? I scoffed. Don't throw that word around like it means anything now. If you loved me, Sarah, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have spent months sneaking around with that guy, lying to me every single day. That's not love. That's bullshit. She flinched at my words, tears welling up in her eyes again. But I didn't care. Not anymore. You know what I can't wrap my head around? I continued, my voice hard. I keep wondering when exactly you decided that what we had wasn't worth saving. When did you look at me and think, yeah, screwing someone else is the better option? Was it after we got married? Before that? Or were you just always a liar? Ryan, it wasn't like that, she sobbed, her voice breaking. I was confused, I didn't know how to. Confused? I cut her off, my voice rising. You didn't seem too confused when I found you with him in our bed. You seemed pretty damn sure of what you were doing then. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt nothing. I let her cry for a few moments, watching her break down. It didn't affect me. Not anymore. When her sobbing finally slowed, she looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Please, Ryan, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I know you hate me right now, and I deserve it. But I'll do anything to make this right. Please, just give me another chance. I shook my head. There's nothing left to fix, Sarah. You made your choice. Now you're going to live with it. She sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But we can still. No, we can't, I interrupted, my voice firm. I don't want to be married to you anymore. I don't want to spend another second with you. You're not the person I thought you were, and I'm done pretending that we can go back to the way things were. It's over. Her lip trembled, and she stared at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Please," she whispered. "I'll do anything. We can go to therapy, we can." "Therapy won't fix this," I said bluntly. "You think talking about our feelings is going to make me forget what you did? You think sitting in some counselor's office is going to erase months of you sneaking around behind my back?" She didn't answer, her head hanging in defeat. She knew there was no coming back from this. She just didn't want to accept it yet. "I want you to move out," I said quietly. "I'll keep the house. Turner's going to make sure you get your share, but I want you gone. Pack your things and leave by the end of the week." Her eyes widened in shock. "Move out? Ryan, where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care," I said coldly. "That's not my problem anymore." She opened her mouth to argue, but then closed it again, realizing there was no point. She looked defeated, broken. But that didn't change anything. She had broken me first. "What about us?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There is no us," I said, standing up. "There hasn't been for a long time." I turned and walked toward the door, pausing just before I left the room. I didn't look back at her when I spoke again. "I'm done, Sarah," I said, my voice cold. "We're done." With that, I walked out, leaving her behind in the house that no longer felt like home. The moment I stepped out of that room, I knew there was no going back. The door clicked shut behind me, and the weight of the decision settled deep in my chest. It wasn't relief or satisfaction that came with it, just a hollow sense of finality. I didn't feel good, but I didn't feel bad either. I felt nothing, and maybe that was the worst part. The life I had built with Sarah, the woman I had loved, was officially over, and it ended not with some grand confrontation but with a simple sentence: "We're done." I went upstairs and packed a bag. I didn't want to stay in the house while she was there, sobbing in the living room. That was her mess now. I couldn't be in that place anymore. Not after everything. I threw some clothes, my laptop, and a few essentials into a duffel bag and left without looking back. I drove aimlessly for a while, unsure of where to go. I could have gone back to Tom's, but something inside me didn't want to burden him any more than I already had. I had been crashing at his place for a few nights, drinking his whiskey, and sitting silently while he tried to make conversation. I appreciated his support, but I needed space to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life now. I found myself pulling into a hotel parking lot. One of those chain places, nothing special. I checked in, paid for a few nights in advance, and made my way up to the room. It was bland and sterile, the kind of place you stay when you're on a business trip or passing through town. It wasn't home, but it would do for now. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank TV screen in front of me. The silence in the room was suffocating, but I didn't have the energy to fill it. I just sat there, numb, trying to process everything that had happened over the past few days. The anger, the betrayal, the confrontation, it all felt distant now, like it had happened to someone else. Like I had watched it unfold from a safe distance, even though I'd been at the center of it. I couldn't shake the question that had been gnawing at me since the moment I found out about the affair: how did we get here? How did a decade of marriage disintegrate so easily? Sarah's excuses about feeling distant, about our relationship changing, kept playing in my head. I wanted to hate her, to blame her entirely for what had happened, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been paying attention. Not that it excused anything she did. Not by a long shot. What she did was unforgivable, and I wasn't about to let myself take responsibility for her actions. But I couldn't ignore the fact that somewhere along the line, we had stopped being partners. We'd stopped being a team. I'd been focused on work, on providing for us, on making sure we had a stable life. Maybe I'd taken her for granted. Maybe she'd taken me for granted too. Either way, it was over now, and there was no point in dissecting the past. I spent the next couple of days in that hotel, avoiding calls, ignoring emails, and generally trying to stay off the grid. I didn't want to deal with the fallout of everything just yet. Turner had assured me that the legal side of things was under control, but that wasn't what I was worried about. It was the emotional wreckage that I wasn't ready to face. Telling friends, family, explaining how my marriage had imploded wasn't something I could handle yet. But life doesn't wait for you to be ready. On the third day, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. It was the first time she had reached out since I left the house. I stared at the screen, debating whether to open it. Finally, curiosity got the better of me, and I unlocked my phone. "Ryan, I packed some of my things and left the house. I'll come by tomorrow to get the rest. Please don't be there. I don't think I can handle seeing you." I read the message twice, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over me. She was leaving, just like I had told her to. Part of me expected some kind of fight from her, some last-ditch attempt to save the marriage, or at least a refusal to go quietly. But no, she was following my orders. Maybe she'd finally realized that there was no saving this, that it was well and truly over. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. Later that evening, I called Turner to confirm that Sarah had been served the divorce papers. He told me she had signed for them that morning. It was official now, the wheels were in motion. In a few months, we'd be legally separated, and I could finally close the door on this chapter of my life. It felt strange to think about the future. For so long, my life had been tied to Sarah. Even after everything, it was hard to imagine a version of my life that didn't include her. But that was my reality now. I had to start thinking about what came next, what my life looked like without her in it. I started by making a list. Nothing too dramatic, just some basic steps to start piecing things back together. First, I needed to figure out what to do with the house. I wasn't sure if I wanted to stay there, but selling it would be a hassle, and I wasn't ready to make that decision yet. I could at least live in it for a while, figure things out from there. Next, I needed to get back to work. I'd taken a few days off to deal with the immediate fallout, but I couldn't avoid reality forever. My job was stable, and right now, I needed that stability more than anything. I sent a quick email to my boss, letting him know I'd be back in the office the following week. Then there were the friends. Mutual friends, ones I'd have to tell eventually. People who'd want to know why Sarah wasn't around anymore, why we weren't showing up together at barbecues or game nights. I wasn't looking forward to those conversations. The pity, the awkwardness, it was inevitable. But I'd deal with it when the time came. For now, I was focused on surviving day to day. A few more days passed, and Sarah made good on her promise. She came by the house when I wasn't there and took the rest of her things. I didn't leave much for her, just some clothes and a few personal items. Everything else? I kept. I didn't care if she thought it was unfair. Turner had made it clear that I had the advantage in the divorce, and I wasn't about to play nice just to make her feel better. After she left, the house felt emptier than I expected. It wasn't that she had taken much, but her absence left a void. I walked through the rooms that night, looking at the furniture we'd picked out together, the photos on the walls, images of a life that no longer existed. I considered taking them down, throwing them away, but I didn't. Not yet. It felt too final, even for me. I was moving on, but I wasn't ready to erase the past completely. Not yet. As the weeks passed, the numbness slowly started to fade. The anger that had driven me through the initial stages of the breakup began to simmer down, replaced by something else, acceptance. I wasn't happy, not by a long shot, but I was starting to accept the fact that my life was different now. That I was different. The divorce would take a few months to finalize, and I had no doubt that Sarah would try to fight for whatever she could get. But in the end, I would come out on top. I wasn't worried about that anymore. Turner had everything under control. What I hadn't expected was the quiet moments, the times when I wasn't angry or busy, when I had to sit with the reality of being alone. There were nights when I missed having someone beside me, even if that someone had betrayed me. Loneliness crept in, and I hated that I felt it. But I knew it was normal. I knew it would pass. In the end, I hadn't just lost a wife. I'd lost the future I thought I was building with her. And that, more than anything, was what I had to come to terms with. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized that I wasn't waiting for her to come back anymore. I wasn't hoping for some kind of reconciliation, some last-minute miracle that would undo all the damage. I was done with Sarah. The future I had imagined with her was gone, and it was time to start building something new. For the first time since this all began, I felt a strange sense of freedom. I didn't know what my life was going to look like from here on out, but I knew one thing for sure. It was mine to rebuild, and that was enough.